This is a tough question because it's early in the passage. It's hard to really even know what's going on. I'm mostly speaking from experience here, but basically, I would know that this question is probably a no line reference question, not a big picture whole passage question. It's probably about some specific lines somewhere. And the reason I would know that is it's just like super specific, right? How would the author most likely respond to another scientist's claim that the theory of embodied cognition cannot account for thoughts regarding abstract concepts such as peace and honesty? It's really specific. So it just feels like I'm going to need a specific piece of evidence, and they might not be telling me where to find that evidence, but it seems like it's going to be in like one or two lines. And so I would think, all right, well, let me see if I can get anything from the chronology rule, right? I don't have any line references, but if I can look at some other questions, I might be able to estimate where to look. So question 13, unfortunately, no line reference. But 14 has me looking in line 20. So I'd say, okay, let me read basically before line 20 and see if that gives me any sort of information about what's going on. And if not, look, I can always come back to it after I do all the other questions, but this is a small piece of text. I might be able to look at it. So I'm looking for like abstract concepts such as peace and honesty. Okay. The implication of the overlap between areas of the brain responsible for cognition and areas responsible for sensory and motor processing is that perhaps the operations of cognition are implemented, at least in part, via sensory and motor structures. Okay. Interesting. So it seems like that's going to be a response to this embodied cognition thing. That is, perhaps thinking also involves activating some subset of sensory and motor pathways of the brain. For example, when you mentally picture sitting on the couch in your living room, the thought might be implemented by partially activating the visual, tactile, auditory, olfactory, and motor responses that would have occurred if you were actually there. So there's a lot of big words here, but basically they're saying if you sit on the couch, something in your brain is going to, or if you think about sitting on a couch, something in your brain is going to kind of act like you are sitting on a couch. I get that. The theory that thought might involve simulating the activity patterns in our sensory and motor areas of the brain is called grounded or embodied cognition. So here's that idea. Okay, well, I guess I can keep looking. Some of the evidence in favor of this view comes from behavioral experiments that show that how you respond to something depends on otherwise irrelevant features of the sensory stimulus. And of particular interest here, these seemingly irrelevant features often involve space. So did they talk about peace and honesty? Did they talk about abstract concepts? Talking about things with space and sensory inputs. They used a lot of words like sensory, motor, sensory. Notice, look what's repeated. Sensory, motor, motor, sensory, motor. Okay, so we see some repetition. I don't see anything about this, though. But let me look at the answer choices. Let's see what we got. Maybe, there's something that's not mentioned or is hinted at, right? Because it says, how would the author most likely respond to another scientist's claim that embodied cognition cannot account for thoughts regarding abstract concepts such as peace and honesty? So they're not actually going to give me the other scientist in the passage. They're making one up for the purposes of the question. So there's like a hypothetical here. So when there's like a hypothetical, the evidence in the lines isn't going to be as obvious as it usually is because we're supposed to kind of logically think about the consequences of the passage. So let's just look at A. Let's just get to the choices here. By arguing that the scientist has not fully considered the mechanics of the theory of embodied cognition. Well, it doesn't seem like the author has considered the mechanics of the theory of cognition. I have no idea anything about that. So I don't know. That's just, maybe it's right. I have no idea. B. By asserting that thoughts about abstract concepts are less common than thoughts about concrete objects. Well, this seems wrong. I mean, first of all, he didn't talk about abstract concepts at all. But even if he had, they're never like quantifying how many thoughts you have of each type. Like, oh, I had 100 abstract thoughts today, but I had 200 concrete thoughts about objects. Like, no, like what? That doesn't even make any sense. C. By suggesting that the theory of embodied cognition should be tested under different experimental conditions. Well, I mean, they talk about the couch thing, but I don't I don't know. I mean, he's not saying anything about different experiments here. We've only learned about one, maybe. So I don't know. This doesn't seem. I don't. Maybe it's right. I just don't. I really don't know. I don't have a strong feeling either way. D. By conceding that the theory of embodied cognition may not account for all aspects of thought. Well, this is doing something I really, really like. It's using a word that's weak, like may. This seems. I think most people would think this is wrong, but this seems really right to me. Because it's so weak and non-specific, and so that's really good for an SAT choice. We really like weak things that don't get too specific. Notice that A and C are very specific. He's arguing specific things. You haven't considered the mechanics of the theory. We need to conduct different experiments. D is just like, yeah, maybe you're right, other scientist. Maybe the theory doesn't cover this. I don't know. And we don't have any evidence that he's considered this. So this is a good sign. Is he open-minded? Is he kind of just like leaving wiggle room with the theory? Yeah. Let's look at that paragraph again. The implication of the overlap between areas of the brain responsible for cognition and areas responsible for sensory and motor processing is that perhaps the operations of cognition are implemented, at least in part, via sensory and motor structures. That is, perhaps thinking also involves activating some subset of sensory and motor pathways of the brain. So, perhaps, at least in part. So, he's leaving open the possibility that this is not the only way that our brains work. So when we think about concepts like peace and honesty, maybe this doesn't apply. Perhaps it does not. I don't know. The scientist, the author doesn't know either. This is very much okay within the text that we've read. The author is not saying everything that your brain does is embodied cognition. He's just saying maybe this is something that your brain does occasionally. It might be true, it might not be true, it might be partly true. He's leaving it open. And so that fits in with choice D, which is like, yeah, okay, yeah, maybe for peace and honesty, this embodied cognition thing isn't true. He's not exploring that idea. We have to be okay with SAT questions, especially with like graphs too, that don't say too much, that just like are like, yeah, like we don't know, that's okay. Not every scientist is going to be definitive about what they've found. So that's actually very common, that it's a possibility. We have evidence of something, but we don't know if anything is definitively true. So this fits perfectly with what I would have expected based on other historical passages I've read, the other SAT science passages, that, yeah, sometimes the answer is there is no answer. And that's the answer.